I want to say to the audience, Salama Datang, which means you are welcome to come. And then I want to say Akakabar. Everybody say, bike, Saja bike. Bike, Saja bike. Okay. That's the equivalent to us saying, how are you? I'm just fine. I lived in Indonesia for 4 years. My husband worked for an oil company. It was Atlantic Richfield at the time, which later became BP. And they, down in Tacoma, actually, they had built this big barge. They called it a barge, but the people that worked on it was a platform for bringing up gas and storing gas. Previously, the installations in the Java Sea for oil, they had just been letting the gas go. So they wanted to keep it and sell it and all that. So they built this huge thing that they towed over there, and it was a tank farm at sea, and it had a hotel on it for the men, a place for the men to stay and a place for them to eat. It had a helicopter landing. It had a lab, and I believe it had a medical office. And the men went out there and they stayed for 2 weeks, and then they were home for 3 or 4 days and they went back. It was very exciting for us to go to Indonesia to live. We were supposed to be there anywhere from 4 to 6 years. I had a terrific job, but I was quite willing to give it up because I wanted to see the world. Very few people, when I talk to them, are clear about where Indonesia is. So I'm going to show you where Indonesia is. Here's Australia, okay? And this is an archipelago of islands. There are 1,700 of them. That's Indonesia. And 600 of them are inhabited. And they know that there are islands out there with natives on them that don't even know they belong to a country. Or at least it was that way when I was there, which you have to understand was from 1975 to 1979. So just above that, Indonesia is Malaysia and Singapore, and then you go up to Vietnam and Thailand and up in that way. And then of course this is the South Seas over here. And this is the west coast of the United States. And this is the east coast. So where you are when you're in Indonesia, you are just about exactly halfway around the world from the United States. And it takes quite a while to get there. And Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. And a lot of people don't realize that because they'd sort of assume it's Saudi Arabia or somewhere over in that part of the world. When I lived there, it was the 5th most populous country in the world. I see now, when I checked some facts and figures yesterday, that it's now considered the 4th most populous. Don't ask me what became 5th, because I didn't get that far. I don't know. So, Jakarta, and if you'd like to come up and look at this after this is over, if you're unclear as to where it is. You know, the funny thing was when I was going over there, people didn't know where I was going, and they thought I was going to the Caribbean. They thought there was that archipelago of islands. Or they said, oh, you're going to be so close to Vietnam. Aren't you worried? Aren't you worried? And you really aren't that close to Vietnam. The good thing you're close to is you're 2 hours away, maybe an hour and a half from Singapore. And the company would send us there for medical and dental, which we could always make up something, especially women could do that. And so we had all these lovely shopping trips in Singapore, and it's one of my favorite places in the world, Singapore. Jakarta now has 9 million people. living in it. It's a very large city. When we were there, it was 7 million people. And I understand that 9 million jumps up to 11 million daily because 2 million more come into the city from the suburbs to work. So they're getting a little concerned about overcrowding. At one time, they imported people from the countryside to come to Indonesia, and it looks like what they'll be doing will be deporting them back out into the country to cut down on the population there. It's very rich in natural resources, and that's why a lot of foreign countries were there when we were there, because they were trying to bring Indonesia back in, bring it out of its third worldness, which was, by teaching them how to do things that they didn't know how to do. And agriculture and oil is the mainstays of their economy. Although they have wonderful craft work, the batiks, the silver jewelry, ceramics, just marvelous things that they do import. And they deal also, they export a lot of tea and nickel and coffee, spices. The religion is 87% Muslim. As I said, it's the largest Muslim country. And it also has Hindu, Christian, and Buddhism. The minority there are the Chinese. But they are Chinese Indonesians. They were mostly born in Indonesia, but they were always treated as second-class citizens. I think the Indonesians resented them because they were the money makers, they were the storekeepers. And when I was there in Indonesia, you were either terribly, terribly, fantastically rich, or you were very, 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 very poor. There was no middle class at that time. So when I was leaving, they were starting to get a middle class because they had trained Indonesian engineers. They were training women to be secretaries in these different companies from the countries from all over the world that were there, had trained them. We had servants. We had...
When are questions appropriate?
At the end. Okay. We had servants, a houseboy, house girl, a yard boy who also opened the gate. It was very important to have someone open the gate to let the car in and out for some reason. I guess so the driver didn't have to get out and do it. And of course we had the driver. And so it was a pretty opulent life. And these people, their salaries were pittances, and it came about that we paid more than other people in the neighborhood, so other people in our neighborhood didn't like that because those servants were getting more. But when we left, we gave them extra money because she was going to have a second baby, our house girl. And that would mean that she wouldn't have to work while she was pregnant. And then he wanted to be a driver. He wanted to move up from being a houseboy. So we gave him the money, to get a driver's license and do whatever he had to do to become a driver. Because they were really, really good people. And we loved them, and we loved their little baby that she had while they were there. So the history briefly is that back in the 1st and 2nd century AD, the Hindu priests and traders came there. And that's why the Hindu religion is still strong there in some parts of the country, particularly Bali and in central Java. And that's where these wayang puppets came from originally, from the Hindu. And I'll tell you more about that after a while. And then they had a whole succession of people inhabiting them, Portuguese and British and the Dutch. And finally the Dutch made them a colony and had a really strong presence there and kept them under their thumb. And Then the Japanese came in the Second World War and threw the Dutch out and occupied the country. And then, of course, the war ended and the Indonesians revolted.
All available assistance to customer service, please. Auxiliary customer service. Thank you.
The Indonesians revolted, and
I've got the pictures now, ma'am. I have the pictures.
But she's not ready for them until later.
The picture.
no, I'm not ready for them. I'll tell you when I'm ready. Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Yay,
So the Indonesians revolted, and women worked beside men, and they got their freedom, and they wouldn't allow the Dutch to come back. And as a matter of fact, at the time that I lived there, they were just allowing Dutch to come in as visitors. Because the Dutch love Indonesia, and they wanted to bring their grown children to show them where they had lived, you know. So, 1949, they created their own Declaration of Independence. So, now it's a lot different. The middle class are more prominent. There's even in the Sunday Times last week, there was a big article about Indonesian women selling and using Tupperware. Do you remember Tupperware? And I guess a lot of Indonesian women are making, housewives are making big money now selling Tupperware.
Avon is next.
They're businesswomen now. And I guess someone who visited over there told me that you see all these people walking around on the streets with iPads and so on. So I'm sure it would be quite a different place than when I was there. So I try to keep up a little bit. I read the Indonesian newspaper. One thing is that has changed is the government. I mean, it's still saying that their Declaration of Independence created, and they have a president, and it was always one of the generals in the military. So this last election that just happened end of last year, they had a general versus a mayor of Jakarta, who was just a country boy. And he won. He won in all his progressive ideas, and of course corruption has always been rampant in Indonesia, and he pledged to get rid of that and so on and so forth. So an interesting quote from him not too long ago in the news about terrorists was that they were going to fight their terrorism with cultural education because they are a multicultural country. And instead of security, they're going to fight it with it. So we'll see how that works out. Now, I have to tell you one more thing before I read, and that's about the Borabudur Hotel. You have never been, maybe you have, but I've never been a place like it, and probably never will be again. First of all, it was just huge on acres and acres in downtown Jakarta. And it had a shopping mall in it. It had tourist offices in it. It had a bowling alley. It had the biggest swimming pool I ever saw. It had a place out back to keep your pets. It had 5 tennis courts. It had about 5 restaurants or bars. And it was just magnificent. And to walk through the lobby was like being at a meeting of the United Nations, because there was all these people from all the world. And you'd see the sheiks with their flowing robes, and the British ladies in their white gloves, and the Japanese chattering, and it was just, it blew my mind away. But anyway, I just wanted you to know, when you hear about the Borabudur Hotel, what it was like, some idea of what it was like to live there. Now, remember, this book is set in 1976. It's a representative year of those 70s. And it was also the year of our bicentennial, if you remember. So, what I'm going to read to you is the prologue of the book because that sets up the book. I am Nelia, born of Indian parents in Indonesia, an archipelago of many islands washed by the waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. I absorbed tolerance for the white man's world in a Methodist orphanage on Sumatra. But it is on Java I live now, and as here I am content, studying Wayang Kulit, shadow plays of puppetry that tell Hindu epics thought to have been brought here by my forebears and passed down through centuries of change in this my adopted country. In Jakarta, I ply my trade, singing and playing the piano in the Pendopo lounge of the Hotel Borabudur, a way to support those studies. This capital city of 7 million people sets the business and social standards of Indonesia. To it have come many foreigners to exploit us and to teach us modern technology and accidentally new ways of living. But it is the Western women who fascinate me. When they arrive, they are scared, defiant, preoccupied with one another. Some are physically ill until their bodies adjust to our heat, light, food, and drink. And they do not know us. We are as strange a fruit to them as that in the baskets placed every week in their elegant hotel rooms. Where insulated, they are lulled to believe they are somewhere familiar. Somewhere they recognize themselves. They share a fantasy of their previous life as a perfect one in a perfect place that will be the same the minute they return home. In the Wayang philosophy, using the mythical worlds of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, everyone has a different role to play in society and must know that role. Queens behave as queens. Clowns behave as clowns, just as expatriates behave as expatriates, and Indonesians as Indonesians. The ladies of the Borabudur struggle with problems they brought with them, while my fellow citizens grapple with puzzlements presented by the foreigners. Situations neither would have encountered had they been somewhere else. I am only the musical background to their life, but I watch and listen, feeling their pain, seeing them entangled in problems of choice, not easy to call good or evil. For choice is central to the Shadow Plays encyclopedia of human problems. Misery or hope, joy or sorrow, defeat or triumph, love or hate. And in the depth of these shadows, as well as prejudice, lust, greed, envy, compulsion, things we can see but cannot touch, at once real and not real. To understand it all as well as the warring cultures inside myself, I would that it were something as familiar to me as a performance of the Wayang. But alas, the stories are all in the process of being invented. But perhaps the Daling knows, for he is part playwright, part director, part actor. More than that, he is a man of magic who can speak for everyone. Not only is the Daling the puppeteer and the narrator, he is also the conscience of the audience. In the course of a performance, traditionally from 9 at night until 6 in the morning, he will manipulate 100 puppets made from water buffalo leather. He will sing songs, and he will cue both the requisite female singer and the traditional orchestra, the gamelan. All this he does by tapping signals with wooden knockers and metal wrappers on the puppet box. In due course, he will make his audience laugh and cry, while teaching them great truths without moralizing. Imagine then a setting for the Wayang. All that is needed for this art are a screen and oil lamps for casting shadows, a chest in which the characters that are not in use are stored, and a display of puppets ranging from the largest to the smallest, whose manipulation sticks are thrust into the soft wood of a banana tree log. And of course, the darling. Listen now, as he raps the puppet box with a heavy mallet. The dog, the dog, the dog. A great gong sounds. Seat yourself well. If you choose a place in front, you will not only the shadows, you will see only the shadows as do the masses who see them superficially. But if you view the screen from behind as do the privileged few, you will see how the darling operates and thus gain a deeper understanding. And so the gamelan begins to play. The darling seats himself cross-legged before a long white screen with a red border, a bright light suspended above the head. The dog, the dog, the dog. The music swells with grace and ease. He flutters the players into positions for stories of good and evil, darkness and light, and all the shades of human frailties in between. Come, let us listen together as the Dalong imitates many voices. This sets up the book for you to believe that these stories are being told to you by this piano player. I'm going to show you. These puppets are my personal puppets that are well over 150 years old. They were probably about 100 years old. It was uncertain, but somewhere close to that when I got them. So I don't know. Now when they're in performance and so on, the paint on them would be very, very bright. And the clothes, of course, would be, you understand, it's because they are so old that they look sort of dull and so on. And so that is Rama. He's the major character in the Ramayana, if you're familiar with it. Both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are Hindu epics to deal with good and evil. This is the woman, I don't know what her name is. That one was marked. These they use, the Dalong, he uses these, both sticks on both hands, to manipulate them and make them move around and so on and look like they're talking. There's a stick. Oh, we've lost the stick. Aha! Okay, well that's easier to show you. Okay, all right, that fits up to the body this way, and because this pointed end would be the point that would be stuck in the banana log, and these go on all night. They're big entertainment for weddings and special occasions, and everybody is versed in these stories because they know them from childhood and they have just come down through the centuries. So off with your head. Now I've chosen to read the first story, which is called Ceremonies, because it shows, and I won't be reading it all, it's rather long, but it will be if you don't know what culture shock is, you will know after you have heard some of the story. I will be skipping over some parts but telling you what's happening there because of the length of the story. And the young lady who is operating the slides At the end of this story is when we will do the slides.
Okay,
Because
thank you.
they're of an Indonesian wedding. And that same Indonesian wedding I was at that gave me the material to write about the Indonesian wedding in this story. Okay. The thick, hot breath of Indonesia suffocated Lisa the moment she walked off the jet into the Jakarta night. She shifted the carry-on bag to her other shoulder, blew a strand of hair from her eyes, and tried to keep up with David's lope across the tarmac. After all, she'd come because she loved him too much to deny him what he wanted so badly. But she wasn't giving up any more of her independence. She'd be her own woman here, no matter what. Then a rush of adrenaline. Men with guns surrounded them. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. For God's sakes, guns! She knew it was a military government, but she'd never anticipated. Masoop, Masoop, rang in her ears as brown-faced soldiers nudged the passengers inside to a steamy nightmare, a polyglot of raised voices. The air was fetid, the chaotic lines she stumbled along endless. Loudest of all were the soldiers, barking orders, scolding laggards. She turned to David for reassurance just as he was pulled out of line. An officer pointed to a sign she couldn't read. Evidently we do health cards first, David said. They stepped to the end of the string of people the officer indicated. On the plane, Lisa had met an Indonesian woman who was returning home after 12 years in the States. Sri Kandi told her the Indonesians had been inspired by the American Revolution in their own fight for independence. She called freedom Merdeka. Lisa allowed it to roll over her lips. Merdeka. She liked the freedom, the soul of her own country, was her first Indonesian word. If she'd been born here, she'd have been a revolutionary, one of the Indonesian women fighting side by side with the men for freedom from Dutch colonialism, enduring the Japanese occupation, and putting down the communists in '65. At home, she taught the privileges of U.S. citizenship to junior high school civic students. After conscientious deliberation, she'd finally decided to put off going to grad school, not only because she couldn't bear the thought of David being where she wasn't, but also for the sake of learning firsthand how freedom worked on the other side of the world, something she could share with future students. In the Immigrasi line, once again, she pushed her bag along the floor with her foot as they inched forward. The noise, the bright lights. If only there were more white faces. If only she could have a drink of water. If only David didn't have that silly, bemused look on his face. Her fear forced the angry words. What kind of country are they running here anyway? David gave her a warning pinch, for now an officious man standing in a glass box beckoned her forward. Dainty hands with a heavy gold ring took her passport. American, he grunted, but she didn't see any welcome in his bored eyes. Turisma, how long you stay? She couldn't take her eyes from the armed guard slouched against the wall nearby. Unable to muster up any bravado, she allowed David to answer for both of them. Yes, the official said, can't go. Joint venture with our great Pertamina oil. He smiled. His rubber stamp thudded against their papers. For a moment she was disappointed, realizing she'd half hoped they wouldn't get in, half hoped she might not miss the grand celebration at home, the bicentennial after all. But it seemed to her he reluctantly returned his passport, and his stare was a question into her eyes, into her heart. Could he discern the lie they told? Did he know they weren't married? But so what? It was the 70s, for heaven's sake, and women were beginning to do what they wanted just like men. Then they were in a barn-like room piled high with baggage. Officials motioned them to place their luggage on a low table. Boys lounged nearby, waiting to carry the bags outside, and just beyond them, spectators ogled them from the other side of the glass wall. Lisa felt like a fish in an aquarium. Two white couples tapped on the window and gestured at them.
Thank you.
Wave, honey, David said. Someone's come to meet us. She waved. That's what we both want, right? He reminded. She made her wave a little more enthusiastic, although her makeup was running down her face, although all she could think about was a bed in an air-conditioned room. They counted their luggage to be sure it was all there, and then Lisa tried not to care the strangers were pawing her things. Finally, officials marked their bags with chalk, and they were out in the tropic night, fighting through jostling Indonesians and hustling taxi drivers. The two smiling couples took them in tow. Fighting her disorientation, Lisa tried to smile back. "We always meet our husband's new people," said the tall anorexic one who introduced herself as Mrs. Sheets, with a Z. "Mrs. Warburton, dear, that's who I am," said the one who looked like a well-stuffed pillow. Faintly she heard that the women were going in the car and the men in the van with the baggage. She found herself in the back seat with Mrs. Warburton, who said, "Why you don't get the air conditioning fixed in your car, Edith, I'll never know." She reached over and rolled down Lisa's window. As the car sped over the dark road, Lisa relaxed into the upholstery, shutting out Mrs. Sheets' babble that the 2 seasons here were rainy and rainier. She slept dreaming this was all a dream, and actually she was teaching her class, who turned out to be Japanese. She woke abruptly with the sibilant merdeka echoing in her head, a magic word surely promising much for Lisa's stay here. The open road soon became city streets that made her anxious and ill at ease. All kinds of shops on wheels competed with cars and trucks for the thoroughfare. Kerosene lamps cast eerie shadows over tables, lining the roadside, loaded with bright fabrics, pots and pans, and odd-looking brooms. A perfume of coconut and oil and grilling meat, and something very sweet, a red lunch she'd never experienced before, wafted through the window from cooking stalls. The car crept along the roads, thronged with people in strange dress, past motorcycles and odd three-wheeled conveyances, pedaled by men. The soft lilt of voices lulled her. "Ew," a peddler called. "Nyak, nyak," called another. Then Sheets and Pillowcase were talking to her, and the spell was broken. "You young people are so lucky. The entire office has been invited to this grand event. A great honor indeed. They seldom ask us to any of their ceremonies, and there are people very high up. Yes, very high. It's like going to a funeral in Bali, or seeing the bulls run in Pamplona. It is a grand event, Mildred, but hardly on that par. And since you've never seen those bulls..." "Oh, shut up, Edith, just shut up." Lisa drifted into oblivion until she heard Mrs. Warburton insisting, "You must never take a sit-down bath once you get into your house." "It's okay in the hotel, though," Mrs. Sheets amended. Lisa opened her mouth to protest, then shut it. She hated showers. "You'll get a vaginal infection if you do. From the water, of course," Mrs. Warburton went on. Mrs. Sheets interrupted again. "You know you must boil it to drink it, and while we're talking of such things," Mrs. Warburton's steamrolled over her, "you can't go into any of their religious places. Well, if it's..." She looked at the driver. "That time of the month," she mouthed silently. Lisa sat up straight and stiff. "What do you mean I can't go where I want when I want?" She was not big on ceremony, and this obvious rite of passage their do's and don'ts for new arrivals was wasted on her, but she would try to squash her feelings for David's sake. She loved him enough to come halfway around the world with him, and she wasn't going to spoil it for them now. The car pulled into a semicircular driveway. A smartly uniformed doorman with Hotel Borabudur written across a pocket opened the door. He said something she thought must be words of welcome and ushered them under a canopy, and then through great glass doors into the relief of air conditioning. Lisa had the impression of an immense building with giant crystal chandeliers and blinding light everywhere. She glimpsed smart shops flanking the reception lobby, and then up the escalator. She smelled teak oil and new furniture and a pleasant fruity odor she couldn't define. Stepping off the escalator, she found herself in a main lobby that could be in any ultra-modern hotel in the world, except that a group of men in bright-colored sarongs and matching headcloths were playing White Christmas. Their hollow bamboo instruments gave the familiar tune, a tinkling and exotic marimba sound. Then 6 strange women were shouting into her face, "Welcome to Jakarta. Isn't it nice, dear Mrs. Warburton said. Those Campco wives greet all the newcomers. Mrs. Sheets nudged Lisa. Don't get too close, they bite. Lisa looked warily at the women. Joe, Miriam, Lexi, was it? Vonda, Shara, Lila. As if from some good distance she heard the oil woman say, and Christmas Eve reservations, shopping at, we will, you must. She had forgotten it was almost Christmas, but she'd already taken care of that, thank you very much. A small artificial tree with decorations. David's filled stockings and his expensive presents would be here by then in their air shipment. And she wasn't going to be sucked up by a bunch of wives. She'd do something important with her time here. Maybe write a book. She was good at research. Perhaps a comparison of the two cultures. Fights for freedom. And Mrs. Warburton said, a captain is what you need. They have some really nice ones upstairs in the shopping arcade. The very thing Mrs. Sheets said to wear to the wedding. Lisa stumbled against David, who with the other men had joined them now. They exchanged a guilty look. He squeezed her hand hard. The sham wedding ring bit her finger, reminding her they were here under false pretenses. Get me out of here, she muttered. Get me to our room. Well, the next day, of course, they're found out that they're not married. You could not have stayed. They could not stay unmarried in Indonesia because Indonesia law would not allow that. So they're told by Mr. Sheets and Mr. Warburton that it's as simple as either you get married or you go home. So they have a simple little ceremony on New Year's Eve, and they're married, and their life goes on pretty much the way it was. And then their house is ready for them to move into, or they're shopping for houses to move into, and the Sheets and Warburtons are talking about this wedding that's coming up all the time, and they're trying to push them into a house that's in their neighborhood. And of course, the last thing David and Lisa want to do is live where those people do. So finally, it comes about that they do move into a house, and it comes to the wedding is coming up now. Global movers and the momentous occasion their memories had been heralding for so long, their mentors had been heralding for so long, arrived almost on top of one another. After she sat 2 days in the empty house awaiting the promised truck, it arrived the day before the Sumatran wedding. So far, the only damage Lisa had found was mildewed bed linen. We really should stay home and finish unpacking, she said as their new car wound its way out of the city and down the road to Bogor. What, and miss the wedding of the century? We'd never hear the end of it. She knew he was trying to make her lighten up, but having work done on the house at the same time they were settling in was madness. It all seemed so permanent and difficult. His 2-week stints offshore dragged on while she fantasized how wonderful it would be when he returned for 5 days. But it was always different from what she'd anticipated. He wanted her by his side at the pool while he talked shop to the other men. She didn't understand what they were talking about, and besides, she freckled terribly. Or he spent hours on the tennis court and was too damn hot out there for her. And she hadn't found any servants she liked except the driver, who appeared to be a nice boy, but now on the open road he didn't understand their commands to slow down. And then he did. They were behind a slow-moving truck. It was filled with soldiers wearing fuchsia berets. At sight of the rifles and cartridge belts slung over their shoulders, the fear always waiting to burst out since her arrival attacked. She shivered and moved closer to David. Makes one think of Vietnam, he whispered. Then what do these people have to be so damn patriotic about anyway? She thought of the national spirit and unity professed in the Pancasila. It claimed a democracy guided by agreement after deliberation among representatives. Its intent was to create social justice for all Indonesians. But what kind of freedom expelled wire service reporters and put the country's great writers under house arrest? No, this was not the Indonesia of her expectations. Declaration of Independence or no, it wasn't the home of the free and the brave. Her anger at this disappointment surprised her into speech. "Go round them," she ordered. "Tina Neonian," the driver said, his voice bordering on the historical. "No permisi." Then a tortured "Please." "The US of A is not, honey," David said, taking her hand. "Merdeka, Merdeka," her heart cried. "I said go around them now." Her voice was shrill in her ears, just like the voices of the silly woman here, telling her what she could and couldn't do. The driver cocked a shaking finger at her. "Maybe bang bang." "For Pete's sake, Lisa, leave it alone," David said. "No wonder he's scared. An old Indonesia hand told me in election year these army trucks scour the city, battering dissenters, hauling them off to prison. The American flag waves before her eyes, and she's back home at the bicentennial. People clap and cheer as she gives her speech about how important a true democracy is, and that personal freedom. The fear squeezed her heart as they were halted by a soldier, but it was because they had arrived and he was directing parking for the general's daughter's wedding. Then the Warburtons and Sheetses pounced on them and dragged them off to a vantage point near the entrance of the handsome villa to watch the arrival of the bridegroom. Shielded by a purple umbrella, surrounded by dancers, clad in the same royal color, he was escorted to the front door by members of the bride's mother's family. "That's because the bride's ancestors come from a matriarchal society," Mildred said, looking smug about her knowledge. Some kind of welcoming formalities were happening at the threshold to the house, but Lisa couldn't see very well through the crowd gathering. On the porch, accordion music began, soon accompanied by violin and guitar. Then the guests following on the heels of the groom, and then tourists were pouring into the house. The first thing Lisa saw were shoes of all shapes and sizes discarded everywhere, just as they'd been stepped out of. How would she ever find them again? Hibiscus and frangipani and blossoms of the flame tree bloomed in every conceivable spot in the house. The air was sweet with the juices of great mounds of pineapple and mango, starfruit and rose apple, and red bananas and other fruits Lisa had never seen before. A traditional tiered wedding cake graced an antique Dutch serving table. Ed steered them past the children sitting on the steps of the sunken room to a row of folding chairs. Great steaming platters of yellow rice surrounded by delicacies as foreign to Lisa as the fruit had been were laid out on a shaped runner that covered most of the floor of the vast living room. More flowers were strewn among the dishes. The groom's family sat cross-legged before the food. The women in traditional dress with heads covered sat at the far end of the room. The men, all wearing squat black hats, sat immediately before the groom and a man of religion standing on a dais. "The bride stays in the bedroom while the ceremony goes on out here," Mildred whispered. "They read her the do's and don'ts of marriage from a paper, which she then signs." "They're married by microphone," Edith giggled until shushed. The strange rite in the language Lisa couldn't seem to learn went on and on, the groom's family continuing to chew and gulp, carrying on loud conversations. Lisa thought it would seem more like a real wedding if the music on the porch had been brought inside. She closed her eyes, and this is all taking place at a clearing of Sumatran jungle, perhaps in the shadows of a great fire or strange huts nearby. A lion, a rhinoceros, an elephant for witnesses, and the music is definitely tom-toms. At last the ceremony was over, and the bride, her plain face beaming beneath a towering gold filigree headdress splayed at the back of her head like a peacock's tail, appeared and was presented to her bridegroom. A member of the wedding party mantled the new husband's business suit with a resplendent robe, placed a puffy turban on his head. The couple, bejeweled and dazzling in gilt and crimson and turquoise, were led by attendants also in centuries-old attire to two ornate and garlanded thrones. Lisa's eyes closed again. This time she and David are in a field of daisies, speaking wedding vows they wrote themselves. A circle of flowers graces her head, and she wears not a traditional gown, but probably white lace anyway. No matter the custom, it's still the joining of two lives. Voices on the loudspeaker interrupted her reverie, blaring static, hushed. Then Karen Carpenter singing, "We've only just begun, white lace and promises, and we're on our way." The great sob wrenched from her heart was just as unexpected as the song had been. As hard as she tried, she couldn't hold back the tears, making rivers in her makeup. She turned away, hoping no one had seen her capitulation. The two older couples were in line to pay their respects to the bridal pair. Other guests were occupied with finding a place at the runner of foods which had been reset for them. But David was there, leading her to a corner, inhabited only by a large white cockatoo chained to a perch. Carefully, he wiped her face with a clean handkerchief. It was just, I understand. You know I don't blame you. It's nobody's fault. I've really tried. I know. He pulled her closer. We'll check it all. But we're half moved in. They can send it back. Who will tame the Patterson's jungle? It was an inane thing to say, but she couldn't think of anything else. He cupped her chin with his hand so she had to look directly into his eyes. Probably snakes in there anyway. I wouldn't doubt it, she snuffled into his handkerchief. Or else those big lizards. We'll never know. I'll make the arrangements tomorrow. They're going to be mad, she said. He said, I don't care. The main thing is you'll be home for the bicentennial. Certain inalienable rights, she reminded herself. And among these, then they agreed. After the festivities, the ceremonies, they'd get the divorce. Bridal party arriving. These were Sumatran people, although they lived in Java, and they had this, what they call a matriarchal wedding. So the men are all relatives, uncles, and so on and so forth of the mother, and they arrived in these resplendent costumes. I'm sorry you can't see the colors because I suspect that they're just too old, but originally they were very brilliant. And this is part of them arriving. They do a little dance up the driveway. That's part of their dance they do. See, those guys have purple shirts on. We were standing on a little porch kind of watching them coming. These are just a crowd watching them too. You can go on. These pictures, I'm afraid, are not as good as they once were. Go back to that last one, would you please? Yeah. The guy on the far right, that's the bridegroom. And the men all wear those little hats in Indonesia.
Is that like his mother?
It probably is. We didn't know the family, but from what people told us, we just knew what people, but individuals, it was hard to know who was who. And that's the men. The men are all sitting on the dais, and they have this religious ceremony going on. I think you'll see the man of religion there pretty soon. There's musicians. There's people eating. See, they're sitting on the floor. There's me. Do you see me there in the far right? Boy, that's a lot younger me, huh? Prettier, too. And, of course, the children are just wrapped, Every time anything goes on, the little Indonesian children, they're pressed up against fences or whatever to see, all these things. they grew up all their life with all these ceremonial, wonderful, exotic things, and they love it. That was the music.
What are they eating?
Well, they were eating what I read, yellow rice, which is called nasi kuning, and just all kinds of delicacies that would have been made before the wedding. There they are. See the background there? It's pretty rich. Could you go back one, please?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that one. The background there. You can see the runners on the floor. They're fatigued. In the background, it's all sort of like a gold embroidery and white, and they're having the wedding. You know, the males are doing the wedding right there, and the bride's not even there. Okay, move on. Okay, we can move on. There's just more people eating. That's the man of religion there in the white. He's the Marian guy, and I don't know who that is. Member of the family, I suppose. Okay. That was that picture on the wall was, I believe, the general who, a younger version of him, who was the father of the bride. Yeah, see, that's the man of religion. Of course, we didn't understand a word he was saying. Oh, I suppose some in our party did. There were some people that spoke excellent Indonesian, but I hadn't been there long enough. There's those children I was talking about.
What language do they speak?
They speak Bahasa Indonesian, which is a modified Malaysian. When Sukarno came into power, there was I don't know how many dialects, and he wanted to unify the language. So he came up with what they call Bahasa Indonesia, but their second language is supposed to be English. But a lot of them speak Dutch because they're nursemaids and so on and so forth. And plus, the rich Indonesians send all their kids to school in Holland, in college. Well, there's some of the women in their pretty costumes. The Indonesians' native dress is it's just unbelievable, beautiful. I had one made. That was my friend Femi. She lives in Bellingham, and her sister, she's Indonesian, and quite an interesting story. She was working in the American embassy, and during that communist uprising time, and a handsome young journalist, American journalist, came and married her and took her back to the United States. And I used to live up near Bellingham, and I knew Femi and Ted. He was a professor then teaching journalism at the college up there. And so she came over there. He was on sabbatical, and they came over while we were living there. And so that's the reason we got to go to the wedding, because it was somebody he knew through his journalist work. And they used to house sit for us, like when we'd go home on vacation. They'd come and house sit for us. They were there. They wanted to be in there 2 years instead of 1 year because he got a, what do you call it? Fulbright, and he stayed a second year and taught at the University of Indonesia. That's you didn't see her. Can you go back 2 pictures?
Bride.
Yeah, okay, now the next one. I'm sorry. Forward 1. Okay. There on the far right is the bride. You're in the bride's bedroom now. Bedroom door was open, people could walk by and look in and so on, and that I don't know whether that was her mother or who that was there. But there were some women in there with her. And now see, he's out there, he only has his suit on and his little pedgy hat. And but she's all in her glorious bridal finery, with the big headdress and all that, waiting in there. And it's piped in there to her, the wedding ceremony,
And so after the wedding ceremony, she's presented to her
Yes,
husband.
she will. You'll see her. You'll see her. Yeah.
Are these arranged marriages?
I don't know if this was an arranged marriage or not. That's just an interesting face. Actually, Ted, who I was talking to you about, he took these slides. He did.
Drinking tea or beer?
No, that's tea. That's tea. Muslims don't drink in Indonesia. Not supposed to anyway. And that's another interesting face. Isn't that something?
There you are.
It's Femi and I think he was the uncle, the sister's brother. And he must have been talking to us. I don't remember that, so long ago. Women are getting to eat now. The men eat first. The women are getting to eat. I think we ate last. I think the guests ate last, if I recall. Okay. I can't tell what that is. Is that food?
Mm-hmm.
And these are pictures that are in the bride's bedroom. We should get some more pictures of her soon. Yeah, see, there's the bed, her bed. There she is. Someone's making up her face for her.
Are you serious? Wow.
I believe that's just one of the attendants. The bride was very plain. She was not raving beauty. There she is in her headdress. Or it might be one of her attendants. I can't remember. She either signs the wedding papers in her bedroom, or I think she does before she comes out. And once she signs the papers, then she comes out. And by the time she gets out there now, the men have all put on over their dark suits that they had on. They've all put on these rich, beautiful Indonesian costumes, so that when the wedding party is all together there, they're quite resplendent. Yeah, that's her attendance. That's the bride. Looks like she's coming out now. The thing that blew me away was playing We've Only Just Begun. Yeah, it just blew me away. So see, they're all dressed for her now. That's him and her. And people will come up now and start congratulating.
Now, did they know each other before they got married? Or?
I don't know that. I can't. I don't know if it was an arranged marriage or not.
Were they given gifts of coins?
Coins?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. Why? Is there a
So
reason?
many where you went up and you handed the bride. They usually want full coins, but most people can.
Where and when did you get the idea for this book?
Well, I was sitting in the Merrimack Bar in the Borabudur Hotel. I'd only been there a few days. I was sitting with my husband and a Belgian gentleman who was there to teach Indonesians how to butcher. And these tantalizing hot hors d'oeuvres on the bar in this opulent barroom. And music, they call them the Batak singers. And there are 3 men they're actually from Sumatra, and they come around and they take a serape and put it around a woman's neck, and then they serenade her, and that's supposed to be a great honor. So they did that with me, and it was just like there was just people there from all over the world, and all these different languages were going on. And I just said to myself, this is just too much. I've got to write about this someday. I'm going to write about this. So that's when I first got my idea that I would do it.
Did you write while you were there?
No, I did not write except maybe an occasional note or something. I was so busy living the experience and learning the culture that I just didn't do that till later, after I left. And I was working on something else, a novel that I had wanted to finish for a long time, but because of the way I worked before I went there, I could only do it in dibs and dabs.
The name of your novel, Ladies of the Borabudur, is referred to as a novel told in stories. What does that mean?
Well, it means that each story stands alone, but when you read the book taken together, it's a novel. And it's sometimes called linked stories, sometimes it's called interrelated stories. Joy Elect Club was one of those. Probably the very first one that ever was like that was Chaucer's Tales. And Ray Bradbury and Faulkner, they started out writing those kind of books.
And how did you link these stories together then?
Well, there's certain ways you do this with, you can do it with character. And what I did was I made some characters major in some stories and they'd be minor in others, and vice versa. You can do it with a place, and that was the Borabudur Hotel. We lived in the Borabudur Hotel for 5 months before we got our housing and our papers and everything, and most people did when they were there. And so the Borabudur Hotel was in every story. And even when they moved out, it was such a wonderful place. They were always going back there for dinner or to take a swim, or somehow it would be mentioned. And of course, the piano player who was telling these stories, I can give her little cameos throughout so that we would remember that she is the one who is telling the stories. She's the observer. She's seeing all this about these people. And so you can also do these kind of stories using a family, or a particular object, like there's some movie called The Red Violin, and there's stories, yeah.
So how did you create your characters? And are you one of them?
Well, you know what Flaubert said about Madame Bovary, c'est moi. is me, you know. I am in every one of them. The basic thing I started with was that there was three kinds of women there. One who would never stay. You just saw that with Lisa. She would never have stayed. There were other women there that wouldn't stay because the culture was more than they could bear. They wanted to be able to go to their mothers for Sunday dinner and the drive-in for a hamburger and all these kind of stuff they couldn't do there. And they just made their lives miserable of their husbands, so then their husbands would have to quit and go home. And that was one kind of woman. Then there was the kind of woman who stayed within her own little Americanness. You know, you only played bridge with the Americans, and you went to the American club and swam, and you played mahjong with the Americans, and you didn't really make friends. The only Indonesians you knew would be your servants, and I would say that was most of the people there, and I think it was like a protection against the culture shock for them. And then there were the people who really wanted to know what Indonesia was all about and explore the beautiful culture and learn the language and because you never know a people until you know their language. And so it was, I based them on three different kinds of people, and then I just mixed it up, you know. Certain things actually that are in the book really did happen over there, but I gave them to other people than the ones that it did, because at that time I thought I could be sued. Those people are probably all dead now. I'm the only one alive, you know. But anyway, yeah.
Okay. Indonesian history, religion, and politics are woven into these stories. They are rich as well with mystical belief and cultural elements. Did that take a lot of research?
No, because I was living it. I was just living it. The biggest thing I did about research over there was I bought a lot of books that I probably would have been able to get in the United States about different cultural aspects. But because I was there living it, I knew what I would be wanting to write about when I did write the book that I didn't know about. So I backed it up with books, and particularly in Singapore, I could find, just stumble over the right book so I came home with a lot of books, and the research there as I needed it. I learned a long time ago, you don't do research first. You start writing, and then when you come to something that you need to research it, because otherwise you're just researching.
You talk of culture shock as a major element in the book. Could you define what you mean by that?
Well, it's something that's different totally from your life. You go into a country where, and it's their country, you're their guest, and you have to follow their rules. And, they once had something they called the ugly American. Americans don't always want to follow other people's rules. And so it was a shock, but actually it can be culture shock just moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. Or if we move to Wyoming or Montana, or something totally different from what we grew up with.
True. Your resume shows that you've published a wide variety of written words. Why is that, and how do you define yourself? Novelist, playwright, essay writer? What?
Yes.
What?
Well, I started out, I wanted to do it all. I couldn't focus on what do I want to be. I wanted to be a journalist, and I did, and I wanted to be this, and I wanted to write stories, and I wanted to learn about writing, and I wanted to be able to write articles about writing and so on. And for a long time I was very guilty about that. I thought, well, you should pick one thing and stay with it, and then you'll be successful with it. But it wound up I just did a whole lot of different things, and now I'm not sorry.
When did you start writing, and how did you develop as a writer?
Well, when I was 3 years old, I was sitting there with a pencil and a paper, just scribbling, I guess. And my mother says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm writing." And then when I was 8, I was at my great aunt and uncle's in the country, and I was up in a sumac tree, and I had little pieces of yellow paper, and I wrote something called Barbara Goes to the Country. And I went in, I was very excited about that, and I told my aunt that I had just written a novel. And so when my mother came, I told her about it, and she cried because she said that's what she always wanted to do. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And I suppose, back to answer your other question, if I am anything, even though I've written plays and all kinds of things, I am probably most comfortable in a novel, writing novels.
That's a nice story. Makes going to make us all want to help our grandchildren publish a little book on yellow paper. As a teacher of writing most of your life, how did that contribute to your writing career, or did it?
You know, sometimes I don't even know how I got into doing so much teaching. I did much more than I wanted to. I think I stayed too long at the fair. I taught longer than I should have. I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed helping it. I was good at inspiring people and motivating them, especially people just getting started in writing. And but I gave too much of myself and wasn't doing enough of my own writing. And now that I'm older, I wish I had stopped a number of years earlier. If I have any regrets, that's the one regret I have.
What advice would you give novice and developing writers?
Write, and pay no attention to rejections.
That's harder to do than say, huh? As an octogenarian now, where do you see yourself regarding your writing life? Haven't you done it all? And is there anything you're burning to do?
Yeah, I want to do all of it again.
Again?
Yeah, I just want to keep writing.
Okay. And what are you working on now? I might have cheated because you gave me that information in the bio, but tell us again.
Well, I'm finishing up a novel about Atlantic City in the 60s, sort of in the interim time after Boardwalk Empire, 30. It's Atlantic City 30 years later when it's on a slide downhill and it's going to become a ghost town if they don't do something. And this was just, it was before they decided to get gambling in there. And I started writing that novel in 1962. And it's been through many versions, and it was my thesis for my MA degree, and I expect to publish it late this year. And so that's sort of, you know, when I say I have a lot of unfinished work, there are a lot of things I sent out over the years that I finished, but now I look at them and I say, oh, that's not what's right. I know just what to do with that. So there's a lot of that to do, but what I really want to be doing, and I've started on, is a memoir trilogy. It's 3 different books about my life. And the first one's called Passion for Words, The Infinite Longing. And that was all my life. All I ever wanted to do was write. And I discovered maybe 5-6 years ago that my successes and failures as a writer seemed to parallel the women's movement, you know, and things that were happening better for women than my career was better or whatever, and things that held me backward, things that held women back. So that book is going to bring that into it. And then the second book is Surprise You're Old, which is Rumpelstiltskin's solution to the tarnished golden years. And that's the things that have happened to me since I got older and less mobile, let's say, and the awful things that happen with people and the good things that happen with people, and how do you deal with all that, and how do you deal with unexpected health problems, and just, you know, trying to put a sunny, not really sunny, but a brighter edge on a sad topic. Mm-hmm. And then the third one is called Caterpillars Butterflies, Miracles, Oh My, what my soul really wanted. And I've become a lot more spiritual in the last years too, and so it'll be like a spiritual book.
Interesting. What philosophy would you like to leave us with? I'm sure you have one.
It's never too late to be who you are.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Are there